This episode contains discussions surrounding mental health. If at any point during the episode you or someone you know is in need of support, call 988 or visit iasp.info for help. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to another episode of the Make Mental podcast. Once again, Broken Record Caleb is going to introduce a wonderful guest. We have an influencer, a YouTuber, a mental and physical wellness advocate, a upcoming social media icon, I will add, a travel enthusiast and fashionista, as well as a very new special project that I will let her talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jack Vlahos. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much, Caleb. That was quite the introduction. I think you were too kind there.
No, I mean, I was doing a little bit of research, just enough so that we can have a solid conversation here. And I was like, oh my, I ran out of room on my sticky note. I had to get a bigger one. I was like, all right, what else do I need to say about her? I mean, we will be focusing mainly on eating disorders for our listeners in this episode. I want to let everyone know that that could be triggering in some way. So if you don't wish to continue or to just fast forward through that portion, like every episode, there is some topics that when guests are so gracious and vulnerably go in depth, for some people, it's awesome, but for other people, they just want to know the connection is there. So, but did I miss anything, Jack, that you're doing?
I don't think so. I think you actually caught more things than I normally do. So kudos to you. That was
this
impressive.
New project, though, before we get started, I saw it on social media. I don't know if you know what I'm hinting at. One letter at a time here. One letter at a time on social media. I am excited to hear about this because this is a passion of mine that I suck at. I mean, and I think a lot of it has to do with my colorblindness, that I just like put two colors together and like, boom, it's amazing. But that might be like a new hidden skill, right? I could just market myself on colorblindness. But I'm excited to hear about your content creation and like marketing endeavor here.
Absolutely. So I've always kind of been passionate about content creation. I think I grew up with a camera in my hand since the age of maybe 5. My dad gave me this like little Barbie digital camera that I still have. So that's, I would say, when kind of my obsession with kind of just content creation, documentation, capturing moments began. And then, when Instagram, kind of social media, all of that back in, the early 2010s came about, being able to post that and share that and have kind of a digital diary just became something that was very baked into my everyday life, I'd say. And so now I'm kind of, 29 years old and going through a bit of a career crisis of what do I want to do with my life? I envy people that know what they want to do with their lives, and they have just always known, and they're happy and they love their jobs. So I'm just kind of going through that, like, what do I want to do? And, what am I good at? So kind of starting a new project of potentially dipping my toes into, content creation and social media management for other people.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who follows your digital diary, as you so eloquently put it, knows that you have what it takes to do it. So now it's just a matter of time, of patience and believing in yourself. And really, patience, I can't stress that enough. That is one of the hardest skills to master, but one of the most beautiful skills to master once you get it down. For me, that looks like every 3 days I get it down, and the 2 days in between I'm crazy. And I know that's a lot of people here, but I'm so excited that you get to add that to your long list of hats that you wear. What was this decision that I'm reading on your blog here, Jack in New York, to move to New York? Where were you before? What was this big life change? And then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in Boston before. I grew up in a suburb 45 minutes north of Boston called Ipswich, if anyone's aware of it. Most people are not, so I usually just say Boston. But I lived there pretty much until I was 28 years old. Also lived, areas of Massachusetts, college. I actually lived in New York for a little bit during college as well. So bounced around, but mainly been in that, North Shore area of Massachusetts for a long time. But I actually moved to the city with my now ex back in October 2022. And then we ended up breaking up, and I moved out and moved into Manhattan on my own. And I've been here for almost like a year and a half now, I think, which is just kind of, it's where I always wanted to end up after I interned here in 2016. I knew I always wanted to get back to New York, and even before that, I always wanted to live in New York City. I really don't know why. I think I just loved the movies, and I mean, everybody says that. They see the movies, they see the fun, glamorous life of writing and content creation. I know the show The Bold Type. I don't know if you are familiar with that. It was kind of a brief show on Freeform, kind of right around when I was in I think it was right around or after I graduated college. It was like after I interned at Cosmo magazine and 17 magazine. And so that show was like so relatable to me, and I was like, I need to get back there. I want that life. And I know it was a TV show, it's not totally realistic, but at the same time, it comes from somewhere. It's inspired by real life, and real life events. And so I always wanted to get back here, and I'm so happy that I am.
Yeah, that is absolutely wonderful. And I think it's interesting that you talked about like everyone wanting their life to emulate a movie in some way, but what people forget is that unless it's a live performance, and even I'd argue in a live performance, how many takes of a movie scene do people do before they get the final product, right? Even in what looks like perfection on the silver screen, there is so many tries, so many attempts, so many adjustments,
Mm-hmm.
even potential character changes. You
Mm-hmm.
write some in, you write some out. Like, that's life. So the fact that you were able to, yeah, no,
And
go ahead. Go
sometimes
ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, sometimes I feel like, the scenes, they're scripted a certain way, and sometimes they go with a take that's not even that. They love something else, something different that happened that you didn't even know or didn't
Yeah, the
even
biggest
expect.
film I can think of that occurred is Aladdin with Robin Williams. I think it wasn't allowed to be
Hmm.
awarded original screenplay because it was so ad-libbed and it was off the, I mean, I argue it makes it more original, but it was so off the script what he was doing. It was incredible. Like that
Hmm.
you can call audibles like that in life as well. When you decided to take that move from I guess we'll call it Boston. I have family in Upton, Massachusetts, so I kind of know where you're referencing, but not completely. So we'll,
Okay.
we'll reference it
Yeah.
as Boston like you did. What was the feeling for you initially when you called that life audible, when you were like, I want to go back to New York, let's make it happen? Go Global is a free flowing technology company that handcrafts, embellishes, and manufactures garments and accessories. Designed on the principles of people, places, and possibilities, Go Global reimagines fashion and is inspired by you, the people of the world.
I it's funny because it was 2016. I interned here for a semester. I went home, and I had really bad anxiety at the time. So this is kind of a little bit of some mental health issues that played a role in. I talked myself out of basically coming back to New York. I actually had like some job interviews lined up, and I was like pretty much set to come and interview and look for places and come back right away. And then I ended up just having just a really bad period of anxiety, and kind of talked myself out of it. It was kind of like, I'm not ready. I won't make it, basically. And so I ended up staying home for 6 years. So 2016 to, yeah, 2022, until I finally made it back here. But a big part of the decision was because my ex, at the time, was moving here for a job as well. So I was moving with him. So that was, part of that decision was because he knew I loved New York. So, I'm very thankful for having been able to play a part into the decision of coming here, because there were a couple of options on the table. Ultimately, I do think it was a really great decision for him to be here too. It's a good opportunity. So,
Yeah, I always think it's so interesting on not only the decisions individuals make, but what motivates them to do them. When I know you said it took you quite a while to kind of gain the confidence and mitigate that anxiety that for me sits on my left shoulder, my confidence sits on my right. That's how I visualize it. But after 6 years of kind of waiting around, looking, searching for that confidence, after getting like what some consider a dream internship in the land of opportunity, what was that self doubt? I mean, you had to know you were qualified enough because you got that internship, and I mean, in Boston is a phenomenal city as well to do some of this stuff in.
mhm.
What was the final push besides maybe your former boyfriend kind of encouraging you to move with him?
Honestly, I did a lot of just self work in those 6 years. I was going to therapy. I had been on an anti anxiety medicine for a while, and so when I had gone, I'm trying to think of like exactly the timeline. So when I got back from college, I remember having a conversation with my mom and kind of talking about how I didn't feel like myself. Felt very sluggish, just very kind of present, but physically present, but mentally just very not focused and foggy. And so I had been on the same anti-anxiety medicine since I was 14, and I think I was 21 at the time, or 20, almost 22. And so we kind of talked about I had been on it for so long, maybe my body just it wasn't doing what it needed to anymore. And so I ended up switching a couple, and this was like the worst experience ever because my doctor just kind of took me off of one and put me on another and didn't transition, and then did that a couple times, and then finally took me like off of something that didn't work. So then went back on one final one, and then slowly weaned off of that, like in a normal prescribed way of don't just stop taking it one day, like take lower and lower your dosage until you're done. That is what worked to help me get off of it. I actually haven't been on any sort of anti-anxiety or antidepressant medicine since I was 23, 24. I think maybe 24 is like when I right around then that I was off of that. And I just worked really hard with my therapist to kind of be able to get to a place where I was able to mentally kind of handle those anxious thoughts, because like, I had really bad anxiety. I was very much like, there were some days where it was like an effort to get out of bed. It was bad. And I think, when you asked about the confidence piece, there were a couple of job situations that I had where, my first job, like right out of college. So I was working at a golf course for a little bit, which was really great, like summer gig. But I met someone through the golf course that ended up connecting me with a job. Unfortunately, the job was not a great environment. I'll put it this way: I was hired for my looks, and that quickly became apparent. And just the treatment was very inappropriate. So that really just messed with me after that. So I just had a lot of anxiety centered around kind of that and like the workforce. So I got a job in a coffee shop for a little while, which was nice. And kind of felt like a Rachel Green in a small town. But I kind of just, yeah, I worked really hard with my therapist to get to a place where I was, feeling more confident and more secure in myself, because I think I had a lot of just self doubt and I was self critical, kind of a lot of that. So that was just kind of the perfect storm of like me just kind of thinking I can't do anything crazy or big or whatever, like move like that or have a job like that. I kind of was like, I'm good in a small town doing just small town things, and like happy with, just my boyfriend and kind of just this life of whatever. Like I'll get a 9 to 5 and kind of will get married and have kids someday, which, don't get me wrong, I absolutely think that that is a happy life and a happy scenario. Just I did quickly realize that that was not the life that I wanted. I definitely need chaos, like the chaos of the city, and just kind of fast pace, not necessarily that traditional, like, everybody, like my family, people that kind of stay in the hometown and kind of stay around there and get married and have families and stuff. I did realize that was not for me.
First of all, I want to say I'm sorry that you had to go through the work situation of 99.9% of your other qualities being overlooked. I mean, I can't relate on that aspect, but I apologize, and on behalf of all the employers that do that for them, I'll apologize for them. And I apologize. I'm sorry too for all the other people that go through that, like it has to be nice in one aspect to be like, oh, okay, I am good looking. But at the same time, it's like, that shouldn't be the reason I'm hired. Like you should be told you're good looking in other parts of your life, not at work. Like that's why we have HR. Okay. Like there's a reason. That's one of the reasons we have HR. I'm not going to pigeonhole HR, but moving on from that, I think the topic of anxiety medicine and medications for mental health in general is just fascinating. And I still think it's this scary, unknown, complex world. And it appears that way even for a lot of our medical professionals, right? The decision to just stop and switch or wean off, like everyone's body and mind is going to react differently. So is there a perfect prescription? Like there's so many unknowns that I think it's really based on what you feel is right for you and what you can consult your medical doctor for, your therapist if they're qualified, your psychologist, your psychiatrist, whoever you talk to. I think that's a decision that you have to come to on your own terms. And I think it's such a tightrope because I do think it works. I really do. I think that for a lot of people, it's not like they wake up and they're like, woohoo, let's add a pill to my day. Like that's just, I don't think someone does that. I mean, if you do, I'm not here to make fun of you, but I'd argue that anyone who's on it or has been on it doesn't get up and like, it's not like they're taking their vitamin C, right? But I think what it does for a lot of people that I've talked to is it quiets the brain enough for them to be able to tackle their problems. I think again, my personal opinion here, when used appropriately, or how I would use it if I were to need it, I would use it as a crutch, right? To slow, like I said, slow down the noise, slow down the anxiety, or the reverse effect if you're depression, whatever you have going on, bring your brain to that equilibrium so you have enough headspace, confidence, as you called it. Clarity is another big word to go to therapy to tackle the problems rather than to get up every morning to tackle the problems, if that makes sense. Do
Mm-hmm.
you agree with that, or do you think that medicine for mental health serves a different purpose? I'm curious.
I would say I agree with you. It's funny because I remember sitting in the doctor's office when I was, 14 years old, being told that that was an option that I should look into and that I, probably needed it to kind of give me a kickstart, I'd say. And that's not the right phrase, but I feel like in my particular situation, I was so malnourished at the time. This is when I was, really struggling with anorexia. And I couldn't really focus on anything. I wasn't, I feel like everything was so, I'm struggling with the word here, like suppressed basically, of like all of my emotions and feelings and thoughts. Like everything was just very suppressed and I was basically a shell of myself. And so my therapist was like, I think that you need this to kickstart your body because it's not producing what it needs to in order for you to be able to function and heal. And so when she described it to me that way, I was more open to it, but I was very much like anti, like I don't want to go on meds kind of thing, because that's just what the stigma was back then. Like there was a very negative connotation to being on anti-anxiety or antidepressant. Like, everyone was like, oh, you're on meds, like things like that. It was very negative. But then I went on it and ultimately, I think it did help. I apologize if you
No,
can
it's
hear the
it's New York. It's
sirens
New
in the
York. It's
background right
perfect.
now. It is New York. It's the soundtrack of my life. And I love it. So I, I went on that. It definitely helped me. It helped me be able to get to a place where I did realize that not only did I need to recover, but I wanted to, and I was able to. And then I stayed on it for so long because I think I was so young, and I think I wasn't as educated about what it really did ultimately, and the long term effects and things like that. And so I just kind of stayed on because that was like my status quo. And as I got older, I kind of realized like, oh, I don't necessarily need to be on this. Like I want to try life without it. And so, especially after that really bad up and down period of switching different ones and going off of them, I was like, no, I don't want to be on this if this is what it's doing to me. If like coming off of it is going to throw my emotions like so out of whack and just kind of make me an emotional mess. So, really working hard to kind of, as you said, like you get the clarity when you're on there and you're able to really focus and kind of do the work to realize what the root problem is. And I think that for me, I mean, this is just my personal opinion, is that, the medicine helps a lot with getting you to that level, but I think it's a band-aid kind of. It's not the long-term solution, but I do think that it's a personal opinion and it's a personal choice of, if you want to stay on that and it's working for you and you are happy and you're like able to live your life to the best of your ability, then I think that's great. But I know personally I was kind of like, I want to see if I can, be able to be off of this and not have to rely
Yeah,
on
I think you hit it spot on, at least from my personal opinion as well. I'm a firm believer in getting to the root cause of things, right? If I if I
it.
go home and I'm angry at my girlfriend, it's like, wait a minute. Am I angry because I mean, I had to take her dish to the sink or whatever. I'm just using a ridiculous example, right? Or am I angry because I didn't close a deal at work? I didn't sleep well. Like there's, you know what I mean? And that's very, very
Mm-hmm.
overly simplified for mental health and
Mm-hmm.
medicine, right? But I always like to kind of, and I say dumb it down, but I don't think it is dumb it down. I like to provide a different perspective on how you can think about it. So I'll do that really quick, and then I really, really would love to dive more into you and your eating disorder and recovery and journey and I say fun in the nicest way possible, but all that fun stuff that brings me excitement that we actually get to talk about it out in the open. Oh my goodness. All right, I digress. So, for me, thinking about medicine and mental health, I always try to relate it to a physical ailment in medicine, right? Going very simply to a broken wrist, you're going to get a cast. Okay. You have air quotes for people that are listening here. You have a broken brain, you can go to therapy, right? There's so many different avenues. You might not always need a cast for your broken wrist. You can go to physical therapy, right? just take away the word physical, and it's still therapy if you think about it that way. In terms of medicine, if you just had appendicitis and you had surgery, you're not going to take a little Tylenol, right? That's not going to do anything. It's just not. You're going to need something stronger, and that has to be prescribed to you, that has to be talked about, that has to be, you have to know all the side effects, right? I like to look at mental health that way as well, right? If you're waking up and you're like sluggish for a day or two, okay, maybe have a Red Bull or something, like you just need, like you said, a kickstart of energy. But if you need an extreme kickstart, don't go drinking 10 Red Bulls by any means. Please don't. That is probably the worst idea I've ever said on this podcast. So really don't. You're going to need to sit down and talk to those professionals, discuss it with your trusted circle, really sit with it yourself and figure out how you can get yourself that extra kickstart. And I think when you think of it that way, it's less scary. And you might think about it, you might discuss it with your trusted circle, you might talk about it with your doctor, and it might not be right for you, right? There might be other things you could try first. And I think you just have to be open to the possibility of helping yourself rather than closed to the notion of remaining in a space in life that you don't want to be in. I think once we look at it that way, it becomes way less scary, and it actually becomes, I'm not going to say encouraged, because I don't think we're quite there yet, and I don't know if it ever will be, at least in my lifetime, but I think it becomes more socially acceptable if that's the task we're trying to accomplish. And for me, as long as the person gets the help they deserve, then that's enough. But let's jump into you and your journey even much more. I don't want to tell you where to start, so I'm just going to open the floor to you, all of our listeners, at about 22 minutes in here. Now would be the time to skip forward. I don't know until when. Again, we'll put it in the show notes, but we'll give you a second to pause, check the show notes out, and skip forward if you feel like you might be triggered. And if you are at any time, 988 is the number to call, or iasp.org is the website we like to give out. So, Jack, the floor is yours to tell us a little bit more about your eating disorder and recovery.
Sure. Thank you. I guess there's no better place to start than the beginning, which, I won't go crazy into detail because, as we kind of mentioned, I always try to be careful with how I talk about things and to avoid being triggering as best as possible. But obviously, everybody is different and different things will trigger different people. So sometimes unavoidable. But I would say, the first time I remember being aware of my body and making, dietary changes. It's funny, I was just talking to my mom about this recently too, was probably when I was in 4th grade. I remember, I took dance lessons and just being around other kids, especially at the time of kind of puberty hitting. It definitely hit me a little bit before all the other girls that I was friends with. So I noticed, changes in my body, and I just was very uncomfortable with that, especially comparing to other girls. Did not help that I was in dance lessons with girls who were, toothpicks compared to me, and also liked to point that out. There's 2 notable points that I want to stress that I in no way say or think that these caused any sort of, eating disorder or eating disorder behaviors in me. I just know that these moments are relevant and prevalent enough that, I remember them and they stuck with me. And also that, we were all kids when these things happened, and people don't understand the power of their words and things like that. There was one moment when I was out on the playground with a friend, and then there was this boy at the time, we're all in 4th grade, who was kind of talking, and I don't know, he was teasing me, but he was basically like, "You're so fat, you would eat a styrofoam tray," which makes absolutely no sense when you really think about it. What does that even mean? But to, a 4th grade girl, she's going to take that and say, like, "You think I'm fat." That's what I took away from that, is I'm fat, not the styrofoam, not the fact that
I'm trying to figure that out, but
I mean, I remember.
Okay, continue.
Like,
well, no, now we can chuckle, but you're right. As a 4th grader, you don't hear this. You don't hear the styrofoam tray. You just hear the aggressive words. Yeah.
You hear "you're fat." Yeah. And so it's, that stuck with me. And I just remember going back in from the playground and sitting next to my friend who I was with and turning to her and saying, "Do you think I'm fat?" And she was literally like, "What? What does that even?" She was like, "What does that even mean?" Basically. She was like, "What?" She was so confused. And I just fixated on that. I can't really tell you why that was something that I fixated on. But I just know that I did. And then, fast forward a little bit to the dance lessons, I would say maybe sixth grade at this point. There were some moments where girls would make comments about, everyone's bodies, not just mine. But there was one in particular that was like, it's opposite day. You're the skinniest girl in the room. So again, that meant you're the fattest girl in the room. And so like those moments definitely stick in my mind as like the first kind of moments that I was becoming aware of my body and the changes and kind of how I look compared to everyone else. And then so that was, fourth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, I actually discovered running. I started running and exercising, a little bit, as much as like a seventh grader is going to run and exercise. But I got into it. And then I think in seventh grade, I was on the field hockey team. So, the first time I was doing more of a rigorous sport. Dance was great, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't the most intensive dance that I was in. I wasn't training to be a professional by any means. So it was kind of, one or two nights a week of hip hop as a 12-year-old. So, not
It's
the
still
most
tiring,
rigorous
though. I
workout
will say
routine.
dance is tiring.
But
Dance is very tiring.
it is.
There's a
It
reason I stopped
is.
doing
It
musicals. It was
is.
too tiring.
Right? It's exhausting. You got to smile, you got to dance, you got to be very like, all of that. It's a lot. It's like it's a full-time job. Literally, there are full-time dancers out there, which props to you because that's impressive. But I would say, once I started doing sports, a little bit more seriously in eighth grade, I joined like the track team. And again, as much as you're training for an eighth grader, but I quickly found out that I was actually pretty good at running. I was pretty fast. I was on track to beat some school records. So I'm a very competitive person. Like my friends and family call me Monica from Friends. And that's the OCD, the tidiness, and the competitiveness. Like that is me in a nutshell. So just to give you some context of, if I was going to be close to beating a record, I was going to beat that record. Ultimately, I don't think I ever did because of my eating disorder progressing to a point where I actually couldn't race anymore. So I will get to that in a second. So eighth grade, running a lot, noticing that was also changing my body. So I was still young enough that I didn't totally understand like dieting and foods and exercise a lot, but I was starting to obviously notice what dietary changes and adding exercise was doing. And I liked it. I was liking what I was seeing. I got comments that I was also, looking better or good or things like that. So that definitely fueled that. And then by ninth grade, it was the summer going into ninth grade. I'll never forget, my mom sat me down. I think I was in my brother's room. So I have an older brother who was a senior at the time when I was a freshman. And I don't know, I'm pretty sure I was in his room. I don't know why, but my mom kind of came in and maybe she was doing laundry. That doesn't matter. So she sat me down and she was kind of like, I don't remember exactly what she said, but she kind of brought her concern that I was struggling with an eating disorder to me. And of course, I was angry and in denial because at that point I was very much in the throes of, restricting and exercising, and it was just kind of getting worse and worse. And so, when you're kind of that deep into it, you're not really yourself anymore. There's kind of this way of talking about an eating disorder as ED, like we refer to eating disorders as EDs. Not to be confused with erectile dysfunction, as everyone likes to say on social media. But so basically, you're you, and you kind of have like your ed thoughts, which are basically all of those obsessive, kind of like OCD, obsessive thoughts. Where for me, it was kind of the best way to explain it is I would have a workout routine and a diet in place, and I would be, happy with maybe the number that I saw on the scale and how I felt and how I was looking in clothes. So I would get to a point where if I deviated from that routine at all, like the world would end. So it's kind of similar to, if you don't flip the light switch 5 times off, like someone's going to die. It's kind of, that's like just a bad example, but that's like the kind of the typical OCD example. It was kind of one of those things where it's those thoughts of like, if you don't exercise, if you don't burn every single calorie that and more that you just put in your body, like you're going to blow up your body, you're going to get fat, like no one's going to like you. Things like those were just some of the thoughts that I had. And so you're just really focused on that and you're not really paying attention to anything else. Like I have blocked out or just don't remember so much of that time in my life because all I was focused on is what I was eating, how I was going to avoid the next meal, how I was going to get a workout in, especially when, my family was starting to pay attention to that and try to, keep me from doing things that were going to harm myself, which was at that point exercising and not eating and things like that. So that is kind of, when it got the worst was my freshman year. I feel like I'm kind of just talking and rambling right now. So
No,
if you
no. Well,
have
this is
anything that
good.
you
This is good. I'm
specifically that you
keep
want me to
going.
talk about.
I did take some notes, but
Okay.
I'm gonna let you finish first because you might answer them.
Okay, awesome. So it went on for a couple of months, maybe through the winter, of really bad. I was trying to get away with. I was being very sneaky about it. Like I would. This is maybe I don't know if I should say this or not, but I'm going to. I don't think this is like the worst thing to say or has that anyone has said about an eating disorder. But I would wake up early in the morning and I would go downstairs and I would like eat my breakfast, but not really. I would kind of like, I would have a bagel and I would rip up the bagel and literally flush it down the toilet and then have like a remnant of it to make my mom think that I ate. Or I would like eat a bite of yogurt and then wash it down the sink. And the reason I'm hesitant of saying that is I'm like, I don't want to like tell too specifically of things that I did because I don't want to come across like I'm giving people ideas of things to do. That's
Yeah, I think it's appropriate in the sense that if people are doing this and don't understand what is going on in their brain, they can use this as a checkpoint. I think we'll leave it in there for that because that is one of my biggest fears with the podcast as well is that I have accidentally given someone an idea that they didn't have before. But I've had I've had more instances of people coming to us and our guests saying like, "Hey, thank you for clarifying what's going on with my body and my mind. Like I had no idea." So I think we'll leave it in there for that purpose. And if you are listening and if you are thinking about using this as an idea, please, if it's not your parent, if it's not your brother, your sibling, whoever you call your caretaker, there is someone out there who can help you through this before it's something you resort to. And if you're here right now, like don't think of like, dang it, I'm here right now, I'm lesser than this or I'm more than that. No, you're just at a different point in your journey, right? That's it's you, and you deserve the help. You deserve to share your story or not. It's up to you. You deserve to live your story rather. And like I said, if you are at this point and you didn't know it, use it as a checkpoint to say, hey, maybe it is time to give myself the help that I deserve. So
very well said. Thank you. And I appreciate that too because I always struggle with what do I say and what do I not say. So I appreciate that perspective of it because that is a very good point. It's a very good point. So yeah, so I was kind of spending all of my time and energy focused on things like that, trying to weigh myself, just trying to keep everything very controlled. It was a very control driven lifestyle and just those thoughts. And so I was very much not myself. And so, that went on for a bit. I was on the cross country team, but I actually was benched, I guess I would say, because I wasn't allowed to run. My doctor just deemed, it was unhealthy. It wasn't safe for me. So I was never able to officially race in cross country that season. I did end up racing a little bit in winter track, but my mom will describe, me running with like kind of my head lolling and just like that I should not have been. She was like, you didn't have the energy, you couldn't even hold your head up, things like that. So I did not beat any records that year, but I still ran because I'm stubborn. So I entered a treatment facility, and so I guess at this time I had a therapist, I had a doctor, and I had a nutritionist that I was working with. So I had 3 or 4 appointments for 3 or 4 nights a week. I think I was going to therapy twice a week. I was going for check-ins for like they would take my height, my weight, my vitals, heart rate, and all of that weekly. And then I had a nutritionist that I was working with who they all specialized in eating disorders and they were really great. They were like the dream team. And so I, was doing that for a whole year, but at this point it was just a couple months. I think I'd say August is when I started seeking treatment with my mom. I was not happy about it. I hated it. I would go into those appointments and just like sulk and cross my arms and look like an angry, petulant, 13, 14-year old. Just very against, talking to anybody or opening up or letting anyone in because at that point I didn't think I had a problem. I thought that I was just being a normal, healthy, dieting person and exercising, which of course was not the case, but I didn't see it that way for a little while. So I ended up in a outpatient treatment because I was 14. I was too young for a lot of the treatment facilities, especially like the inpatient ones. So I ended up in an outpatient one for a little bit, kind of, I would say in the winter, like late fall, early winter of my freshman year. My mom, my aunt would drive me there. I would lock myself in the car. I would swear at them. I was just very angry. I was a little shit, really. I did not want to go. Um, I feel like I almost faked a recovery. I don't even know how you would describe that, but I knew I didn't want to be in that treatment, and I would eat like I was eating, and I was still kind of like going through the motions of like I was eating just enough to kind of go under the radar and not have to go to that treatment center anymore. I don't remember exactly how I kind of pulled that off, but I kind of just I convinced everybody that I was on the up when I really wasn't. So I ended up out of the treatment facility. I went back to school. Well, I wasn't out of school at that point. This was an after school program. And so I went back to school for a couple months. And then by March, I had gotten back downhill. And so my therapist and my doctor, decided that I couldn't go to school anymore. It was basically my doctor told me go to school and you might die, because I might just collapse because my vitals were just very, very bad, and unhealthy. And I just wasn't in a place where she thought that I could even really handle going up the stairs. I actually passed out in the staircase at school at one point. So it's definitely very like not the greatest environment, but I was just very stubborn and I was hiding it from everybody. And so people could see, but when you're alone, no one's going to see what's happening when you're alone. No one knows what's going on in your head. So you're kind of able to hide a lot of these things from people, except of course, when you're losing a lot of weight or gaining a lot of weight or things like that, the physical components, that's what people can notice. So everyone knew something was going on because it was physically apparent, but no one knew, exactly what was going on or going through my mind. Really, in any mental health, you are the only person that knows what's going on. People around you can try to understand and empathize as best as they can, and kudos to them for trying because it's not easy. Um, but I ended up going to this inpatient program for 3 weeks. Still wasn't working because I was still being very sneaky and finding ways to just exercise anyways. Because the program entailed like you would go there. It was daily. It was in Cambridge, so my mom would drive me there every single day of the week, and she would stay in Boston and move the car around as she needed to avoid getting parking tickets. So thank you to my mom for doing all of that for me. But she, would stay there all day. It was like morning to like 3 in the afternoon. So you'd go in, you would eat breakfast, you would do. I don't know that there was a morning snack. There might have been a morning snack and then lunch and then another snack, and then you go home and you eat dinner at home. And so essentially they kind of help you work through. There's like therapy, there's different kinds of sessions and cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that throughout the day. And then you eat meals together, and like you have to be very particular with the way you eat because eating disorder behaviors, things like picking foods apart, playing with it, things like that, it might seem normal and probably is normal for a lot of people to just eat a little odd or like maybe not like you know I don't even know what a normal way to eat would be, but everyone's different and kind of has eating habits. Some people eat very slow, some people eat very fast, some people eat standing up. We would all sit around the table, we would have to eat and drink water or whatever we had to drink, but we couldn't pick our food apart, we couldn't play with it, things like that. So really trying to help us be mindful of our eating and kind of get to a healthier place and a healthier relationship with eating. So I was there for 3 weeks. Wasn't working. And so I ultimately ended up having to go into the hospital. And this is where, I was 14 years old. So I was not old enough to go into an inpatient program that my team was talking about. So they ultimately had me go to Children's Hospital in Boston. And the way I got in was through the ER. They were like, you have to go through the emergency room. That's probably the best way to get in. I ended up being on a locked ward actually for just people with like all different mental health issues, which was really great and also terrifying for a 14-year-old because I didn't know, any of these people. Not that I would have anywhere else, but I didn't know, what anyone was struggling with. The first memory that I have is, my mom and I being brought in and this girl running down the hallway screaming, I have to piss like a fucking donkey, and just running like at us. And my mom and I just like looked at each other and she's like, I don't want to leave you here. And I was just like, I don't know what's happening right now. It honestly ended up being a really, really great program. I met people with way worse issues than I was going through. It just really put everything into perspective. And it was kind of like a ragtag group of kids, all just trying to figure it out and kind of figure ourselves out and figure out how to just cope with whatever hand we had been dealt. So it was very eye-opening and ultimately, a really great experience. I wouldn't have said that at the time, but very, very intense, but I was there for 17 days. Then I got out of the hospital, went back to that outpatient program for 3 weeks. And that was probably around June. And so then we'll fast forward to August, because this is kind of if the final piece of this beautiful little year wrapped up in a bow is my therapist, who she saved my life. She was probably the most pivotal piece in my recovery. I had gone through maybe 4 or 5 therapists before I met her, and I just would go into every session. I would hate them, like, how does this make you feel? All of that stuff when you go, like the typical stuff when you go to therapy. And she was the only person that when I went in there, I sat there for 45 minutes. She didn't say a word to me. She just sat there in silence with me. And then I was kind of like, okay, I guess I don't hate you yet. And so she was like, all right, so, next week. And I was like, I guess I will see you next week. And so, she ended up becoming a very big part of my life that year. I also had a relationship during this year that was not the healthiest relationship for, a 14-year-old. And I remember, like, she would, text me if I needed to text her, I could text her. She once was at a wedding and stepped out and got in the elevator just to talk me through some issue that was going on. Because this was like a very unhealthy relationship where, so kind of this in cope like with the eating disorder was very unhealthy. But a little bit of that experience was, I'd get a voicemail being like, I love you so much, I don't know what I would do without you. And then the next voicemail would be like, you've ruined my life, fuck you, I'm going to go kill myself, basically, is what that person was saying to me. So, having her help me, guide me through that piece and the eating disorder was huge. But unfortunately, actually, when I got out of the hospital, she ended up killing herself. And yeah, and that's actually something that I've not told many people. But I showed up to an appointment one day, and she wasn't there, and I didn't know why. And then I actually didn't find out what happened until years later. So I thought she'd passed away. She had cancer. It came back. Ultimately, she just didn't want to go through that, and she didn't want to put her husband and her family through it. So she decided to, end her life. But I didn't actually find that out until years later. My nutritionist told me. So that was kind of like that. She got me through it and got me out of it. And I was like in the clearing, and then she was gone. And then I kind of just existed for a while.
Wow. That's got to be. No, I'm
Through
just.
a lot of you.
It's a lot for me right now, and it wasn't even my experience. Like, that's. I'm just like, I'm just shocked, because obviously we didn't expect that as listeners, as you didn't in life. Like, how do you continue? Like, obviously, did you start to live for her? Perspective was a big part of your story, right? When you can look back at yourself now and be like, why were you such a stubborn little girl, whatever, like, but at the time you were like, no, like, just, I know my body, whatever, like, I need to do this, I don't want to hear these comments. Like, it's a whole slew of things that played into the actions you were taking. And then I even heard perspective a little bit when you were in the inpatient facility, when you said there was people with way worse problems than yours. Well, I'm sure through therapy you've learned that doesn't make your problems any less real or any less valid. So that's perspective as well. I think when you can kind of separate the fact that my story is still real and valid, but there are also people who have it worse off, like, that's a good place to be, I will say, when you can recognize that your story doesn't, it still matters, even if people have it what you claim to be worse off. And then again, to sit there in silence for 45 minutes with this therapist. I mean, it's crazy that you say that, because the first question my therapist asked me was typical. It was, what brought you here today? I said, I don't know. And she didn't respond. I said, I don't know. I did know, and I've talked about why I've been there, but I said, I don't know. And I sat there for probably 4 minutes, 5 minutes, just rearranging the crayons to what I thought was in rainbow order. But looking back at it, I probably didn't know what order it was in, because I can't see the colors. And she had a little sand there, and I was like scratching the sand with a little thing. And I just sat there so uncomfortable and just tried to control everything in front of me, because that's my OCD component, calm the anxiety that I also have. And then I was just like, well, I do know, And she was like, no, I don't know. That's why I asked you. And then I was just like, all right, I do like you. Kind of like you. I was like, all right, I'll come back again. But I think there's something to be said with for silence and perspective, just sitting with it. I'm curious to know,
Mm-hmm.
and this might be like so far out there that you're just be like, Caleb, no, like, what are you talking about? But I like to ask some of these questions. Without your
I
therapist,
love it.
obviously, we're sorry to hear that. And like I said, it's just, I can't, I can't even. Um, is it, do you ever sit there wishing you had one more moment of silence with her? Or do you take it as like, okay, she physically isn't here, so all I can get is silence, but I still know the conversations that I would have with her? Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I it took me a long time to come to terms with it. I actually, so when she first passed away, when I first found out, I didn't know, that she had decided to take the action and do that. I thought she just kind of passed away, that she got sick and passed away. And so I actually ended up getting a tattoo. My first tattoo was like in memory of her. And that was, like a nice memory. I was kind of like, you saved me, you got me all this way. I'm not gonna just, that wasn't for nothing. Like I'm gonna kind of fight and like live for you, almost live for myself, but also in memory of her, and her spirit, because she was just such an amazing woman. But then I actually had a really, really hard time when I found out that she killed herself. I was very much like, how can you, like, the thoughts that went through my mind were very, very, it was hard because I would never hope that someone would get to that point. But I was like, okay, I understood that she was going through a hard time herself, but I was like, how can you coach me to bear with it and make it through and fight to turn around and not do that yourself? And so I actually ended up going through the process of getting the tattoo removed like halfway, because I was like, I don't want to look at this anymore. Like I had so much inner turmoil over it, but ultimately I never finished getting the tattoo removed, and I kind of am like, that's just part of my story, just ups and downs, and it's not finished yet. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it just, I've come to terms with it now, and I'm kind of like, you're not, she's not here. And so yeah, I get that moment of silence now, and I can kind of just imagine those conversations. And obviously every now and then I'm kind of like, I wish you could see where I am now, and that, I kind of finally made it and figured it out eventually. Sort of,
Yeah,
I'm
I
still
think that
figuring it out.
visual that I just had of the half removed tattoo is just so, it's beautiful. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it really is your story. It's like, I mean, it's all encompassing of what you've shared with us so far. It's like you're like comfortably uncomfortable. You're perfectly imperfect, like as all
Mm-hmm.
humans are, right? It's just that your story held a lot of weight very early on in your life. And not to say it won't as you go on, and not to say it still doesn't, but I think through her, through all the means that you went through all the times your mom sat and moved the car and maybe got a ticket or two and didn't tell you. Um, Sorry, mom, if I just expose you. You probably still don't have to tell her, but um, I think that just all is truly in that tattoo for you, and it's just like you can't completely erase what's happened to you, but you can also learn from it. You can adjust. You can remember. You can celebrate. You can be angry. Like it's okay to experience all of those, because even the people who do this for a living, like they still go through stuff too. And I think that was unfortunately extremely apparent to you for that situation. But I don't want to sit on that point too long because this episode is about you. But obviously, this is a massive part of your story, and now, like you mentioned, your reason why. Um, I want to know now though how, if I guess if the ed thoughts come back and how you can combat them, because I know that, I mean, as someone who has OCD, I know like those compulsive thoughts come back, but I'm working on not touching the doorway when I walk under it, right? Like I some days are perfect, some days like I'm just like, nope, you got to go back and touch every doorway. Like it's really strange, and unless you have it, it's, I'm not even going to try to describe it. How do you combat those thoughts? And that,
I
yeah, how do
kind
you
of feel
combat
like I
those
see
thoughts?
what
But then
I know
also,
what you're
how do you
saying.
forgive yourself if there is a slip up, right? Because it's inevitable.
Mhm. That's that's kind of an interesting one. So I've actually had two, I guess what I would call relapses since that really initial bad struggle. One was actually when I graduated college and that internship in New York City. I tried to go vegan. It was a really bad idea. I can't do diets. I think a lot of people that struggle with eating disorders, especially the restrictive, and just anyone creating rules around food, which is a lot of the eating disorders, but they all look very different. Um, I cannot do diets. Like I went and I took it way too far, of course. And so that kind of led to, some issues. I actually had to leave that internship a little bit early because I was not healthy and I recognized that. And I was like, I can't go back down that path. I can't let myself. And so, it had been so long that I don't, I don't know exactly how I pulled myself out of that. When I went home and I just surrounded myself with like my family, the people that I knew, um, I guess coincidentally enough, I was in another kind of unhealthy relationship, not nearly to the extent of the one that I was in when I was younger, but another one where it was very much like, who are you with? What are you doing? Why aren't you talking to me? Kind of very controlling. So I think that's an interesting connection that I've noticed is that, one, both of my relapses were 7 years apart. But two of them, kind of, or the initial struggle and the first relapse, that was a common factor there where, there was that outside factor of someone else was trying to control me. So, I don't know exactly, I have not unpacked that myself, but that's something that I've noticed. Um, yeah. But just trying to, remind myself of, because it's easy to romanticize your smaller self or just yourself in that struggle. It's easy to romanticize the struggle, but reminding yourself of all of the horrible, bad things that you went through during that time. Also, I guess, yeah, to finish really quickly. So, just trying to recognize, the thoughts and identify, this is not my normal kind of standard and status quo. This is more of the eating disorder coming in, and trying to recognize those thoughts and trying to, again, remind yourself that you don't want to romanticize that time in your life. That wasn't a healthy time. It wasn't worth it. You weren't really living. And just trying to remind yourself of what you fought for, how much you have and how much you have to lose. And the older you get, the more you have to lose, the more the life you've built, and the more that you let the eating disorder thoughts come back in, the more that they are going to control you. And even though you think you're in control, you are really not. I think you're on mute.
I'll never learn. I will never learn. I was saying, I think it's one of those things that you have to learn. And I think I say it just about every episode is you have to lose a little control to gain a little control, and whatever that looks like for the individual, it's clearly a personal journey. But I do want to kind of round out this part of the episode. For anyone listening, we are going to have Jack back on for a part two, which is exciting. But I want to do something I've never done, if you're okay with it. Well, I should probably tell you what it is before I ask you if you're okay with it, but you're being a
Absolutely.
gracious guest. I want to read you back one of your blogs, and then I'll let you sit with it, and then when we'll start off part two with kind of your response to what you've written in the past. I think I'm excited. I'm excited to see what this does if you're okay with it. Okay, so
Yeah.
we're not going to take
Yeah,
one super
absolutely.
far away. We're just going to go back. I had it pulled up, and of course, it's not here. Okay, so I would like to go to one of your blogs that was under the fitness, relationships, and wellness portion of your Jack in New York website. And it was March 14th, 2024. So at the time of recording this, not super far away. At the time of posting, to be determined. So just know these are her thoughts a couple months after writing this blog, just so you can timestamp it for all our listeners. So it is titled "My Eating Disorder: Brain in Recovery." I got upset with my boyfriend this morning. Well, my eating disorder, Ed brain, got upset with my boyfriend over the silliest little thing, too. Let me preface by saying this. I'm 15 years into recovery, and my Ed brain still pops up now and again, and this was the case this morning. I was doing a 10-minute arm workout that happened to give me a very good burn, I will have you know. But it got me thinking, was 10 minutes really enough time to get a good workout in? I figured, not quite, but why not get my boyfriend's opinion? He's a pretty fit guy who was a high school and college athlete and no stranger to the gym. So I asked him, hey, what do you think the optimal time for a workout length is? 50 minutes? Oh, that is not what I expected. He went on to passionately explain that throughout all of his training for sports and workout classes, his sessions were 50 minutes at least, and that anything less probably wouldn't be enough. This quickly sent my ed brain into a tailspin. All of a sudden, I could feel myself getting frustrated. Not at him, of course, but unfortunately, he did feel a bit of this towards him, though. I started to argue, and honestly, I didn't even know why I was getting so worked up at first. Then it hit me. My ed brain heard this number and realized that I did not work out for that length of time these days. I used to, but I no longer can due to an injury that was a story for another time because we're still trying to figure out what that is. But I digress. My ed brain was livid. With me. It started telling me I wasn't doing enough. I had to do more. My workouts clearly weren't doing enough for me. The line of thinking can quickly spiral. Thankfully, I was able to identify that immediately and realize that this was indeed disordered thinking and not rational in the least. Let me take a second to elaborate on the above. This is my ed brain talking to me. My rational brain was also there telling me that this was ridiculous. Everyone is different. Everyone will work out differently. There are so many factors, including your body makeup, metabolism, diet, height, etc. Not only that, but the reasons you are training. My boyfriend trained for 50 minutes at minimum when he was training in high school and college as an athlete. That was essentially his job, so of course he would go through the rigorous training. Maybe you're looking to get into better shape, bulk up, slim down, maintain, build your stamina, etc. All of these things come into play. It is not a one-size-fits-all. At the end of the day, you have to listen to your body. Your body will tell you what it needs, and if it needs a rest day, it will tell you. If it needs a 20-minute brisk walk, it will tell you. If it needs a 50-minute workout class, it will tell you. Anyways, I took a deep breath and then explained this to my boyfriend along with an apology because I may have gotten a little heated. Even 15 years later, I still find myself falling victim to the ed brain at times. It gets easier with time. If this was earlier on in my recovery, I probably would have gotten so in my head about it. But these days, I am proud that I can quickly recognize and shut this line of thinking down before it gets out of hand. No matter where you are in your recovery, these thoughts will likely pop up at times. Being able to recognize them and not give them the power over you that they once held is how you stay strong and fight it. It's okay if you don't recognize it immediately. That also takes time and work. But one day, it will be so much easier. And that is the end of the blog. So I will leave our listeners with that for the end of episode 1 with Jack. And I hate to break it right here at the end of the first episode because I really want to hear your thoughts on this. But I hope I did that post justice, and I hope that you come back with your thoughts as strong as ever on that for us at the second episode, if you will, the part 2. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will also end with something very special at the end of part 2. I promise. That is not a first ever, but anyone who listens to the end of our episodes knows exactly what's coming. So thank you so much for a beautiful part 1, and we look forward to hearing from you again, what should be next week. So next week.